The Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr Speaker, the South Canterbury finance collapse under the Retail Deposit Guarantee Scheme is the largest corporate bailout in New Zealand history. It raises serious questions that the government must answer today. The public is entitled to know what went wrong, why and through whom. New Zealanders are footing the bill and they deserve clarity and transparency about how the government and its regulators handled this important matter. Why did the government roll over in the guarantee scheme South Canterbury Finance when it must have known before that time that it was in significant distress? Having decided to roll it over, why did it not tighten the terms of conditions to prevent the scheme mushrooming and the public's liability being extended further? Why did the Minister of Commerce at a similar time then agree to place the Hubbards and Aorangi Securities into statutory management, notwithstanding the negative impact that must ultimately have on South Canterbury Finance? And why, when distress deepened, did the government choose receivership rather than statutory management or recapitalisation of South Canterbury Finance to allow it to trade its way through its difficulties without fire sale or value destruction under receivership? And why were senior debt holders like Torchlight thus handed a gold-plated deal, discounted debt purchased, paid back at full sticker price, plus fees, plus interest, something Fran O'Sullivan has called usurious? Why were some New Zealanders given and some foreigners given a gold-plated payback and other New Zealanders, equity holders, wiped out? Why was no moral hazard prevented in this case? Mr Speaker, let us examine some of the initial responses of the Minister of Finance to the questions New Zealand is asking. He said it would be unacceptable for the Crown to favour some investors and not others. But as we've just noted, sir, that is exactly what, by default, the Crown did do. Thanks to its perhaps slavish adherence to the ideology of the market, that receivership was the only way out. It's favoured senior debt holders and wiped out equity. Mr Speaker, that is exactly what has happened. Mr Speaker, some people have made a handsome profit at the expense of taxpayers and some others have been bankrupted. Mr Speaker, that may be why Fran O'Sullivan in the Herald today has said the government has effectively been gamed in the name of blind ideology. Or was it to avoid an untidy result in an election year? So Mr English is guilty of manipulating the numbers around the financial liability to the taxpayer. In earlier statements, the government said $600 million, but they have chosen, for the purposes of debate again today, to reduce that to $300 million, sir, deducting from it the interest paid across the whole scheme, mainly from other people like the banks, completely irrelevant to this deal because it had nothing to do with South Canterbury Finance at all. What Fran O'Sullivan has called specious, what others would call slippery, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, the third issue that's been raised by Mr English today is that this all occurred under the original 2008 scheme. A complete red herring, sir, because we all know South Canterbury Finance would have failed before 1 April had the decision not been taken and announced by the government to extend it under the scheme. The fact that it was covered for the future meant that it continued to take deposits and apparently to proceed with the recapitalisation plan. Well, that brings us to the next crucial issue. Why was the recapitalisation process kneecapped at the last moment? The Chief Executive has said publicly they were negotiating until 4 a.m. in the morning. What was on the table? New Zealanders deserve to know because they're paying the bill. What was the term of that deal? Is it true that hundreds of millions of dollars of external equity were available that would have reduced the taxpayers' liability? That South Canterbury Finance could have traded on under either statutory management or a new deal without the value loss of receivership? And were there any conflicts of interest, Mr Speaker, involved in this process by either ministers or officials or other players in this saga? Were they declared, on what dates and under what terms? There is much, much more to come.
The Honourable John Carter.